All right, fabulous. I'd like to welcome everyone who is joining us out there in webinar land. We are excited to talk to you tonight about Lindbergh Life Success Skills. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to introduce our panelists. We are members of the teaching and learning team, and we are all on here tonight to be able to answer any questions that you may have about the work that we are doing within Lindbergh related to these success skills. As I introduce everyone, you'll be able to see how this, and as we go through these success skills specifically, you'll be able to see how this work intersects with all the different roles that we have within the district. I'm going to start off by saying I am Tara Sparks. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for the district, and I'm going to ask our participants to wave when I introduce them. We have Dr. Craig Hamby, our Executive Director of Elementary Education, Dr. Ronnie Zagora, our Executive Director of Secondary Education, and Dr. Jeremy Mapp, our Director of Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity. Joining us tonight will also be Dr. Jill Lawson, who's our Executive Director of Assessment and Student Services. She's having some internet connectivity issues, so she will join us as soon as she is ready. With that, Tony, go ahead and bring up our slides, please. So as I said, we've got all of our leadership team on this call. However, I'm going to go through and lead the conversation as a baseline, and then we'll be able to all speak to the different questions that you may have. So I'll go through these various slides, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to put any questions into the Q&A. If you have not looked at the buttons on your screen, there's a Q&A feature. So as you have any questions, you can just type your questions into that, and we'll save those to respond to at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, so we are really excited to introduce to you our Lindbergh Life Success Skills. This has been a 4-year journey of development, and what you see here is a fabulous graphic that we will use to brand this work and to really focus on ensuring that we're speaking a common language about the skills that our students need to be successful in life beyond Lindbergh. That's our goal with all of this. How do we set up our students to be successful in their college experiences, their career experiences, and their life experiences? And what tools do we help them to develop in their journey with us? The Lindbergh Life Success Skills allows us to have this conversation starting in early childhood education all the way through our graduation from Lindbergh High School. So again, being very focused, being very intentional around the language that we use and the skills that we support and develop within our students. Next slide, please. And for those of you who are looking at that last graphic, please know we're going to go in much more detail about these different elements as we go through the slide deck tonight. As I said, this has been a 4-year journey. It started with a conversation in 2017-18. At that point, we pulled together a group of primarily teachers because we really wanted to have a significant amount of teacher voice as we were talking about how we ensured what we call a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And by that, I mean, we write curriculum and then we say, okay, this is what we're going to teach. How do we make sure that what we teach, when we identify and prioritize specific standards for a curriculum, that those are then transferred into the instruction, what actually happens with students within our classrooms. And then it's also what we are regularly assessing and then giving feedback to our families and to our both parents and students. So it's this idea that we make a full cycle between what curriculum is and what our communications with families are, that they are all very well aligned. In the course of that conversation, one of the things that became very clear is that often when we're talking about feedback to families, grading specifically, we are conflating student behaviors with academic learning. And in order to do that, we need to be really clear about what are the academic learning standards that our students need to master, and then what are those other skills. What we typically call, hidden curriculum often is a term that's used, but those skills that are really going to be essential in helping our students be successful, even beyond the academic standards that we know are important for their success. So that conversation started in 2017-18, and then in the 2018-19 school year, our Student Life Board Advisory began to look at social emotional learning and saying, how do we define what social emotional learning looks like within Lindbergh? And that was what we would call our first iteration of the Lindbergh Life document. And it was entirely focused, and you can see a character committee was also involved in that. It was entirely focused on social emotional learning. And when I say social emotional learning, there are 5 tenets that tend to be a part of that. Are students self-aware? Are they able to manage themselves? Are they socially aware? Do they have relationship skills? And do they make responsible decisions? So those are the elements of social emotional learning. So that's where we started the conversation in 2018-19, but we kind of put a pin on that. So even though we developed a direction that we wanted to go as a district, we realized that we had an opportunity to do something greater and more impactful for our students. At the time that those were being developed, we also were doing a lot of learning as a district. And one of the things that came on our radar was this idea of portrait of a graduate. And when I say portrait of a graduate, it's this concept that we identify skills that are essential, like our Lindbergh Life Success Skills, for a student who is graduating our system to be successful as they go on beyond to life beyond school. Now, social emotional learning is obviously a part of that, but it's not the entirety of that skill set. So we designed at that point a task force to start developing Portrait of a Graduate. It was comprised of members of various board advisories as well as staff. And then, as you all know, COVID happened. And with COVID, we had to redirect a lot of our energy to some other priorities. So Portrait of a Graduate, that task force ended, but we needed to really still focus on, we didn't want the progress we were making around this conversation to end. So we used some resources and some groups that we already had in play last year with our Teaching and Learning Board Advisory, and then that same Lindbergh Learning Team, that group of teachers and administrators who started this conversation back in 2018, to really give us feedback and develop what you see here tonight, which are those Lindbergh Life Success Skills. Next slide, please. So as I go through these various slides and go deeper with you on what these are, I just want to kind of frame how they're organized. They are organized into 5 big ideas: critical thinking and creativity, communication and collaboration, identity and agency, integrity and inclusiveness, and work ethic and habits. Each of those 5 big ideas has 3 outcomes underneath of it. So essentially we have a total of 15 outcomes or 15 standards that are the focus of our work through our early childhood and 12th grade, or starting from early childhood all the way through 12th grade. What you see tonight with the Lindbergh Life Success Skills, those are that is a final draft of the work, the direction that we are going. One of the things we are working with teachers currently on is developing resources that are specific to grade spans. So how we would provide support for these skills for an early childhood student looks drastically different than how we would provide support for a high school student, for instance. So we had teachers come together this summer and start to draft some resources around how do we include this language in our experience with students. And so you'll see some of that language in tonight's presentation as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is our first of the 5 big ideas: critical thinking and creativity. You have heard a lot, families, you've heard a lot of about the 4 C's. So you can see how the 4 C's have been connected into this document to provide that additional focus. So critical thinking and creativity. In our first iteration of Lindbergh Life, we really focused on this word curiosity. And so it was really intentional that we kept that term in here. So you can see this first bullet is about stimulating curiosity and innovation. You all know as parents how often your youngest children are constantly asking why? And then life happens over the course of child development. And more often as kids get older, as adults get older, sometimes we hear that, just tell me what you want me to know. And our purpose and our goal is to continue to stimulate that curiosity in our students, to help them continue to want to learn, to want to grow, to ask questions, to delve deeper, so that they can really innovate for themselves and for a larger community. As a district, we do a lot around design thinking. This idea of how do you identify a challenge that we have and a problem that we have, and then brainstorm solutions, start to prototype what those possible solutions are, test what you've done, and then have that cycle continue so that we can really create some strong solutions for any kind of challenges that might come our way. And then this idea about evaluating change with an open and flexible mindset. And one of the things that's important in this conversation is when we're thinking about change, we definitely want to be open to the possibility of change, but we also want to sometimes say, that change is not for the better. So how do we really think through that and be flexible in our thinking so that we can make those evaluations in a way that is going to continue to support our students? Next slide, please. All right, so what you're going to see on these next two slides are some examples of the draft language that our teachers have developed to help support how this transfers into the classroom. Now, in this particular slide, I've given you some randomized examples from different grade levels so you can see, our grade spans, so you can see what this looks like. So this idea again of stimulating curiosity and innovation for an early childhood student, what that would mean, and this is just an example, it doesn't mean we define it entirely in this way, but it just gives some context to what's the appropriate age span, or how does this look within the appropriate developmental or age span for those students. So this idea that early childhood students can invent activities and play schemes in new ways. So if they're given an object, how do they manipulate that object to use it in a different way? You can see for our primary students in grades K through 2, this idea of designing solutions. How do they brainstorm multiple possible solutions? So you can see the examples like that happens in science, that happens in novel engineering, which may be the result of students read a book and they experience the problem that the protagonist in the book experienced, and now how do they help to solve that problem? What could they do? What could they contribute to that conversation? And then the last example is an intermediate age example regarding open and flexible mindset, being able to see failure as an opportunity to grow. Something I designed didn't work, so I might have to go back and start again at square one. Next slide, please. This example that I have here starts to go into some tools that teachers may use with students. So whereas the last slide was intended to kind of help us understand what does it look like for what do these outcomes look like in particular grade spans, this one starts to pull into some of the tools that teachers can use as they're working with students. Now, this particular example, this entire slide is an early childhood example. So for our early childhood students, the language around these outcomes is more sophisticated than they would understand. So we often use with students what we call I can statements. So how we transfer a big idea to something that is much more palatable to the vocabulary of our younger learners. So one of the I can statements for our early childhood students would be, I can ask questions and add my own ideas to discussions. That's something that an early childhood student can understand what their objective is. And then as our teachers work with students, what are some question prompts that they can use? And what are some learner prompts that they can really elicit responses from our students? So you can see, what do you wonder might be a type of question that we use with regard to this big idea. If something isn't working, I can, and then students would say what they can do. So these are the ways that this actually transfers into the work that we're doing with our students in a way that is age appropriate and helps us to build these skills. So as I said earlier, we're all moving in the same direction and supporting the development of our students. Next slide, please. All right, integrity and inclusiveness. This is our second big idea. This idea that we are celebrating human dignity and acting with integrity, showing empathy to others, respecting the diversity of thought, feelings, and perspectives that people bring into any environment, and how we use those to develop and maintain positive relationships. So then as you go to the next slide, you'll start to see this transfer in what that means for particular grade spans. So what's an example of how we would celebrate human dignity and act with integrity for an intermediate age student, for instance? Students can honor the differences and similarities they see in others. So that idea that, okay, what do we have in common? Let's look for those commonalities, and then let's appreciate those things that we bring to the table that are unique and special about us as individuals. How we show empathy and respect for others' thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. So being able to recognize the diversity of ideas, values, and traditions, and show people that we care about them in how we engage in that way. And then developing and maintaining relationships. This is a high school example. Students communicate respectively with teachers and classmates to create a supportive classroom community. Again, I want to point out that these examples are just that. They're examples. They are not inclusive of everything that may come into play with these particular big ideas and outcomes. Next slide, please. All right, what we have here is a primary example of how this would transfer to classroom experiences for our students. So an I can statement for our kindergarten, first and second grade students would be, I can understand and appreciate the ideas of others. And then questions we would use with students, how can you include others even when you have different ideas or ways of doing things? So think about students who are playing a game and there are different sets of rules that they may want to use. So how do you work through those things? How do you appreciate the differences in those different rules that are brought to the table and use those to make some decisions and to move forward in playing that particular game? And then having students identify, this is a great example, I'm a good friend to others because, and then they articulate what makes a good friend. So again, that very practical component of how we are inclusive with others within our classroom and how we have the integrity to have those relationships. Next slide, please. Communication and collaboration. Again, two of the other 4 C's that I know that you hear often about. Actively listen to understand and support compromise. This idea in communication of listening is very essential for our students to be able to navigate life well, understanding when there is conflict. How do you really understand at the heart of it where other people are and how to support that? As we work on developing teamwork skills of students, we know and we hear all of the time about what kinds of skills students are going to need to be successful in the workforce. Collaboration and teamwork is an essential part of that. So building those skills and helping students understand what is their role within a team, really knowing what that is. How do they give feedback to their team members? How do they receive that feedback? And then how they use that to achieve whatever the goals of that particular team may be. And then clear communication. And I think it's really noteworthy that this focuses on both verbal and nonverbal means to make a clear point. Are those ways of communicating, are they aligned? Is your nonverbal communication connected to what you're saying verbally? And how do those come together to really to be a way that you communicate to make that clear point? Next slide, please. And again, we have some examples of what this might look like in the different grade spans. So when we're talking about listening to understand for high school students, ensuring all group members' voices are heard and respected when doing any kind of group work or group project. As we support teamwork, again, this idea of what's your role within the group? How do you support group members in their roles by giving feedback in a respectful manner? So that would be a middle school example. And then at the intermediate level, communicating clearly. And I think this goes back again to this idea of listening to understand as well. How are you present and attentive as a communicator? What, again, and that nonverbal, like if you are present and attentive, what does your body language say to show that you are really listening to others as part of that communication? Next slide, please. All right, and this is an example of an intermediate support for our students. So one of the things I want you to notice is that once we get to the intermediate level, to grades 3 through 5 and above, the I can statements really start to be the exact language of the success skills. They end up really mirroring. We're not looking at having to change the language to make it age appropriate. Students would be able to understand that they can actively listen to understand and support compromise. And then again, things to get them to think about. How do you do that? How do you show your group that you are listening? And then reflect on, when were you really good communicators? What were some of those best moments? These are examples of how we use that to reinforce and build these skills with our students. Next slide, please. Identity and agency. So this is that idea that students know who they are and then use that in order to be empowered, to have that ownership for their experiences and their learning. One of the things that we talked about, we went around and met with teachers throughout the last week, as teachers were coming back for their professional learning at the start of the school year. And we went around and we met with all the teachers and we talked about these different concepts. And one of the things that was really noteworthy, and we actually got some feedback from a teacher today, is that how often we talk about ourselves, and I say the collective we here, in a deficit model. I'm not good at this, or I'm not good at that. So really getting our students to focus on what strengths do they have? What do they bring to any situation, whether that's a group situation or an individual task that they can use to really contribute beyond themselves. And then by knowing themselves, they also know how to advocate for themselves. And that's that word agency. There was a lot of conversation in our first iteration of Lindbergh Life around the word agency. Would people know what that meant? Should we use a different word that would have more clarity? And where we landed is that we need to really define that on a regular basis, what agency is. And it is really that idea of student ownership, student empowerment, that they use their learning to advocate for themselves, as you can see in the second bullet, how they know what their emotions are and how they feel in situations and use those strategies to navigate complex situations. And then how they set goals and persevere when they have challenges or when they have either a personal objective that they want to achieve or an academic objective. So this is where you start to, well, you can see the intersection between social, emotional, and academic throughout all of these, as these skills become embedded within the learning that kids are doing within our classrooms. Next slide, please. All right, so again, some examples of what this looks like for our learners. So an example of understanding your strengths for our primary kids, can they describe these strengths and then how they use them to benefit others around them? For our early childhood kids, being able to label what their feelings are. I feel sad, I feel mad, I feel happy. And then if they need support, to be able to seek that out from the adults, because we wouldn't expect an early childhood student to be able to solve problems independently. We would work with them and make sure that they knew what resources they have to help them when they feel like they need additional help. And then an example from our high school, that students identify their own personal learning goals. Again, we are really, one of the things I don't think I mentioned earlier, but when we look at these grade spans and we look at K2, we're really looking at where students should be when they leave us in second grade. So for instance, when you're looking at the early childhood I can statements or resources that we have available, it's all designed to be, where does an early childhood student need to be by the time they are entering kindergarten? What's going to help them be ready for kindergarten? So that kindergarten readiness. The same is true of a K2 student. Where should they be by the time they're making that transition into third grade? For a 3-5 student, where should they be as they're making that transition into middle school, and then so forth? So as you see here on this example in 9th through 12th grade, our students should be able to independently identify their own personal learning goals as they are exiting us as high school students. Next slide, please. All right, and here we have this is a middle school example of I can statements and questions and learner prompts that we might use with middle school students. So again, I want you to notice the I can statement is exactly the same as the outcome related to personal strengths and using that to contribute. So that a type of reflective question we might use is, how do you motivate yourself to achieve your highest potential? This way we're getting our students to understand who are they, and then how do they use that to further themselves. So that, again, that combination of identity and agency. And then learner prompts. I learn best when. How do you start to understand what those ways are and articulate that, not just for yourself, but also for others who can support you in your learning. Next slide, please. And this is our final big idea, work ethic and effort. This idea that we know that students need to be able to follow through. They need to be responsible learners. And make strong and sound decisions in order to be successful. We all can have great ideas, but if we don't do anything with it, then it's hard for us to really achieve those success skills that we want for ourselves. So working with our students to help them understand that when they receive feedback, how they can use that to improve and to continue to accomplish the tasks and the goals that they have. I think the second one is really noteworthy. Take initiative, demonstrate leadership, and make sound decisions. There's obviously a lot within that. And I can't help but think about demonstrate leadership and then go back and think about identity and agency, and helping students to understand when are they leaders and when are they followers. We're not all leaders at any given place in time. We understand that our strengths help us to lead in some situations and then to not lead in other situations. So you start to see where this merge of understanding yourself and how these big ideas can intertwine with one another in ways that help students be more productive and successful. And then of course, managing time. How do you organize yourself? How do you chunk your tasks? How do you ensure that you are not at a point where it's a major project and it's due tomorrow? And as parents, we've all had those situations where, oh, I need to get poster board tonight because you have something due tomorrow. What? How we help our students manage their time and organize themselves to be able to start and then see something successfully implemented all the way through completion. Next slide, please. Again, examples of what that looks like in different grade spans. So you can see a very specific one to an English classroom, or maybe even a social studies classroom, wherever students might be writing an essay, but that students are revising a draft based on feedback. So they're using that feedback in order to improve their work. Again, very much an academic component. As we're thinking about our younger learners, students are using their strengths for the benefit of the group, and this is really noteworthy, can justify their decisions. Getting students to start saying why they make the decisions that they do, and understanding that thinking process for themselves. And then for our youngest learners, it's easy to know where we want our high school students to be when we talk about managing time and organizing themselves. But what does that look like for a younger learner? So for our early childhood friends, how they can make a very simple plan and follow through. So obviously the complexity of those steps would look drastically different than what the complexity would be for a high school student. Next slide, please. And here we have a high school example of, again, I can statement looks the same as the outcome. What kind of questions would we be asking students? What kind of prompts would we be giving them? So how do we help our students to understand the habits and routines that they have to stay organized and complete work on time? So they are taking those habits with them in life beyond Lindbergh. And then really being reflective about those habits that maybe aren't so great. How do you reevaluate and change those habits to help you really achieve the goals that you have for yourself? And then one final slide before we open it up to any questions that you may have. So this, as I said, has been a 4-year journey for us in developing these success skills. This year, as we've met with teachers, our direction has been to enter the use of these outcomes and these success skills to the degree you are comfortable, to the degree they fit into your instruction and to the work that you are already doing. So our focus this year is really to develop an understanding and really support how we can get to full implementation in the 22-23 school year. Now, when I tell you full implementation, I will tell you that is still not fully decided on what that looks like. When I started this conversation at the beginning, I said that we were looking at how do we separate feedback around academic skills and behavioral skills for our families. And one of those conversations is, if you think about on your child's report card, currently you get feedback on citizenship and effort. We don't think that is fully encompassing of the skills that students are going to need for success. And there's a lot of subjectivity in the scales that we have right now, a 1, 2, 3, or 4. What does that mean? These topics, as you think about these big ideas that I just shared, there's a lot of subjectivity in them as well. So we're having conversations about, do we have students develop portfolios where they provide evidence of how they use these skills within their learning experiences, or even in life beyond Lindbergh? It doesn't have to be limited to, their examples wouldn't have to be limited to what happens only within the school day, but also things that they do to apply it outside of the school day. I don't know that this is going to be something that ends up on grade cards. That is still a conversation that we have, but even if it did, it would not be a subjective grading scale that we would say your child has a 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 on that. It would be more about feedback around those skills. So a lot of conversations still to be had with regard to that. So our goal this year is to really take the time and to have those conversations and to develop our teacher, our staff, our student, and our parent understanding around what are these topics and how do we support students in being successful beyond the walls of Lindbergh. So with that, I'm going to ask Tony to stop sharing. And I know I have seen a few questions come in. I have not had a chance to look at them, but again, that's why we have our teaching and learning team on here to be able to answer questions related to the areas where these skills intersect with their work.
Tara, I think you kind of answered question 3 and 4 with in regards to grading there at the end of your talk.
Yeah, I'll tackle a question here we have about, the question has been asked of how is it handled in a classroom if, for example, something that's in the Lindbergh Life Success Skills doesn't align with a family's faith or values at home. For example, if having a student is asked to have an open mindset, but their faith says it's not something that they should be open to. And so I want to come back to some of the keywords that were in those earlier slides that, first of all, I don't think we wouldn't equate open mindset with condoning any one person's values, beliefs, or experiences. Open mindset really boils down to respect and dignity. And so we are not asking students to change their belief systems. We're asking students to honor one another's experiences and the values that they bring with them from home. And this is, of course, along the continuum of all the different beliefs and values and experiences that all of our students and our staff bring. It's just having respect for the fact that others may be different from you and they are no less human and they have the same dignity that others have. And when we think about, our students are coming of age in an era where civil discourse is increasingly rare. And so to the extent that we can help our students have those conversations and understand that where I come from and where you come from may be very different, and we may never believe the same things, but I respect you as a person, you respect me, and be able to engage in those conversations of who am I and who are you, and that it's okay that we don't believe the same things, but that we are, still able to be civil and to work towards some of the same common goals. And so we try to model that as staff for our students, and that's what we want our students to be able to reflect as well. So that's what we mean when we say open mindset, is really it goes along with how our students respond and take care of one another and how our staff engage with the students as well.
And I think certainly along with that belonging piece, with the dignity piece is another word of belonging. And that is something that we hope every student and every staff member feels like they belong in our district. And we hope that they are treated with dignity. As Dr. Zagora was saying, it really boils down to that the world is much larger than our current, our simple, part of Lindbergh. It's bigger than even the state of Missouri. And so, we have to be able to understand that treating people and treating ideas with dignity, whether or not they are right in front of us, is important. And that's what that's about.
All right, I see there are a couple of there's a question around, besides the parents on the advisories, have other parents been consulted in the development of the life skills? I can tell you that when we were in the final stages of drafting, I shared out these skills with some members of the community, and we did actually get some feedback right when we were getting ready to finalize and publish around some language within them, and we made some adjustments on that because, and I'll go back to the specific example. I think it was the one in critical thinking and creativity where we say evaluate change with an open and flexible mindset. It originally said embrace. And the point was very valid that not all of those elements, not every time that you are confronted with change, is it something you should embrace. And being able to evaluate is that deeper critical thinking component, which allows us to determine, is this a time when I shouldn't make that change? And again, it goes back to identity and agency too. Like if you have the agency to say this isn't right for me in this moment, then you should be evaluating that change and not embracing it. So that was a part of the work that we did as well to get some additional feedback.
I would also like to add that we've had a lot of input over the last few years from different community partners, business owners in our community. We have a career advisory council. And so when we talk about preparing students for life beyond K through 12 schooling, we're making an economic argument there as well. We want them to be productive citizens. And so many of these skills that you see in the Lindbergh Life Success Skills come from our business community as well, saying when we're hiring people, these are the skills that we see are lacking. And you can look at the state of the workforce reports for our region, and you'll see very similar skills that are listed as things that are so important for the workforce, but that sometimes employers are having a hard time finding employees who are good communicators, who are resourceful problem solvers, who can get along with others. And so it's we're trying to embed that post-secondary success as well into these Limburg life skills. So our career advisory board has taken a look at this document as well, and it has had a chance to review it. And so it's very much aligned with what we're hearing in the region and as a community.
I want to answer too, Tara.
Sure.
There's one that asks about the school's responsibilities to meet state learning standards, especially since you're cutting back on the number of learning standards the school is meeting. We haven't really cut back on any of the standards. We have prioritized standards, which are the essential skills, high leverage skills. We make sure we prioritize those. But that's following the state's model also. They have labeled all the standards as either a priority standard or a supporting standard. And we're doing the same thing with that. And then another question was, what would be an example encompassing these values in elementary classroom art or PE class? The first thing that came to mind was thinking about communication, collaboration, and cooperation. So working with others, I'm thinking PE, trying to meet a goal, having to work with others, and therefore you're going to have to be able to communicate with some peers, and you're going to have to be able to collaborate. It's something we talk about a lot as we make assumptions that students know how to collaborate and that they know how to communicate effectively with each other. And what we find is a lot of times they need explicit instruction on how to do those things effectively. So within a lesson, we're always working on those skills.
There are a couple of questions about parents' roles with regard to, as we're developing student agency, where does the parent role fall within that? It's always a partnership with parents, right? So one of the things that I think is really essential in sharing this is, what does this mean for you and your family as you're looking at these success skills? When we think about the goals that students are making, I think about, and I'm going to use an elementary example, being in a classroom where students are sitting down with their teacher and they're identifying areas of need in their own learning, and students are setting the goal. Let's say, for instance, it's a writing task, and students are saying, I really want to work on this particular element within my writing. And so the teacher then uses that as the conference time with students to try to really support them in growing in that particular area. We know that when students focus on one or two goals within their work, as opposed to the multitude of things that may need to be an area of growth, they're much more successful when we can fine tune that feedback and use that to really stretch their learning.
I just want to add also as well that this is something that we have received a lot of feedback from parents. And most often the question is, what are you doing to help support my students' social emotional growth in the district? And this is an answer to some of those things, but it's also about changing that mindset from thinking, if you look at the identity and agency, oftentimes our students are working from a deficit mindset. They're constantly thinking about the things that they are not able to do. And we're really trying to shift that for students to realize all the strengths that they bring to the table and how they contribute to the learning and how they can be curious about the learning. And so this is a major part of that need as well, getting our kids to realize how strong they are in their learning, and maybe their strength may not be in one area, but it may be in another. So for them to see themselves in not a deficit mindset, but in a strength mindset.
There's another question on here about grading. We do not anticipate grading this in the sense that here you have an A in critical thinking and creativity. You have a B in integrity and inclusiveness. That is not the goal. It's really about feedback and supporting the development of skills.
And also, just to add to that as well, I think the whole idea is to create a process where we are being very accurate with our grades and really showing that when we talk about grades, pulling behaviors out of grades and really getting to what is the student able to do, or what do they know and what are they able to do with the learning, and not focused on things that sometimes cloud grades, such as behaviors or things like that. So we're really trying to clean that line between what is a grade and how is it accurately communicated to our parents.
So one of the questions in here is about the idea of family goals. And I think, again, that goes back to agency as well. that when we talk about identity and agency, that is really about putting that ownership back on students and family. Like, understand what your identity is, and then how you use that to set the goals that are appropriate for you. So that's not us dictating to our students what those particular goals may be. There's obviously the academic things that we would support and develop and grow connected to our Missouri Learning Standards, but there's a lot of individual ownership within all of this work. And that was the intention of it, because really we do want our students to go out and to be able to be independently successful in navigating what these skills are within their life and their career. Other questions?
Just to clarify, no, there are not grades on these skills specifically. The question asked for clarification. No, these will not be graded on a numerical scale or an A through F scale on a report card. I think it's important to note that this document and these Lindbergh Life Success Skills, this is not something brand new that we are going to do. I mean, educators go into this business because we care about kids and we want to take care of kids. And we believe that it is important to help them grow into good people. And so while it may not have been drafted in this way before, and maybe has not been as explicit, schools have always taken care of kids. And we've always tried to help our kids to learn those most basic skills about how to get along with others and how to value oneself and how to be a contributing member in your community. And so in putting these on paper and drafting them the way we have, it really helps students understand that more. And especially as we get to our middle and high school students, we want them to take ownership of this. We want them to be reflective about, how do they feel they have reflected these skills in their work, and not just in their academic work, but in their relationships with others. And so we're not in the business of saying that, you get a C+ in collaboration this month. It's really about students being able to be reflective and articulate themselves what their strengths are. And having, maybe some evidence and some artifacts of how they have grown as a student over the course of their, middle school or high school career with us. So I want to maybe calm any concerns that we are going to subjectively apply some measures to this, because that's not the intent. The intent is to be explicit about helping students understand what some of these qualities are that are going to help them when they leave public school.
There's a question around collective goals and individual rights and liberties. And I guess I would just say a collective goal of our district is to treat people with dignity. And that's a goal of ours as a society, to be responsive to people and individuals. And I think being responsive to individuals is treating other people with dignity. And so that's a collective goal. It's something that I think that we all can agree is something that we can strive for. And that's something that I would say is how collective goals support individual rights and individual liberties.
There is a question about how educators will be trained. As I said, this is really what I would call a soft rollout this school year. So Dr. Lawson and I went around and met with every school and used that as a time to introduce to our teachers what these are, what they mean. As Ronnie stated earlier, a lot of this is not new. Teachers have been working on developing these skills for student success for a long time. What is new is that we're all speaking the same language and moving in the same direction now. I think that is one of the key things that the Lindbergh Life Success Skills brings us, is that level of clarity. So what we're doing right now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a group called the Lindbergh Learning Team. They are a group of teachers who wrote some of the resources, and they will be giving us feedback on those resources and helping us to determine how we can continue to develop resources to support our teachers. For this year, as I said previously, our teachers are open to entering, using these to the degree they are comfortable. There's always a lot in education. There's constantly new things that are going on, and so it becomes overwhelming. And so for us, it's important that we don't say, and it looks exactly like this year. So as we continue to work with our teachers, we have instructional coaches in our buildings. We have resources that we will develop, and that will all be part of our training process. All right, looks like we don't have any further questions. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who's joined us here tonight. It's really exciting to do these speaker series and have the opportunity to share the work that we're doing and make sure that there is that that level of transparency for our families to know what this looks like, how we do our work, and how we support kids. So I want to thank you for being a part of tonight's conversation, and we look forward to seeing you on a future speaker series. Thank you.